when the Clarity Act will get passed, right? There's some people saying, if that were to happen, it would be late February or early March by the time it's back on the table. Then you got midterms. So, if they did want to kick the can, this is a great excuse to be able to do so.
To kick it down again.
Yeah. One last time.
It's funny. I want David to have some input on this, but I mean, XRP at its point is it's the most manipulated financial instrument out there. Why do you think that is? Oh, you can answer that, Jake.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I was looking at well, I mean, I'm looking at silver. I would have said silver was the most manipulated, but as it's skyrocketing here, I had called for what I thought was going to be a top around 100, and we're past that. This is bad news for the COMEX here. They are not going to be able to cover these obligations. I don't know where they're going to get the silver from. They're going to have to move to, cash sales on these when people claim them, if they don't roll them forward. And that's a big piece of, you called it the market meltdown. It's kind of a melt up right now in these commodities. But yeah, I would agree with you. I think XRP, and Ripple's part of that. I don't make any bones about it. They do sell XRP onto the market to fund their business, but it's for the overall benefit of the ecosystem and the network over the long term. And because of that, there tends to be, more supply available. We've got another tranche coming available here in just a few days. On the 1st of each month, they get, the escrow releases for $1 billion. And they tend to re-escrow a large portion of that. About 700 million on average is what they've done over the last year. And they put about 300 million on the market. But with the OTC desk and the dark pools, dwindling in their supply and the volume on these ETFs picking up, I think there could be a situation where there's not a whole lot on the market, on the exchanges available for trade. And we will see that supply shock eventually, kind of like we're seeing with silver.
Agreed. David.
Well, I kind of, going back to the original point that you were making, Verson, when it came out to okay, has Ripple really positioned themselves to be the main leader in the space? And I certainly think that, with the acquisitions that they've made, and how they have really set themselves up to be the #1 leader for CBDC development. Of course, custody with Palisade. I think they got Mataco and Standard Custody in there. They got clearance through Hidden Road, all that. Then they take on G Treasury for institutional cross-border remittance, which is massive. And then you see all these other linkages between their partners, like what they're doing with BlackRock. They've got some stuff going on there. I just think it's almost an inevitability that we are going to see, them really coming out, on top, being the tip of the spear with respect to how this gets all unrolled globally. BIS, IMF, they've all cited Ripple and their technology, as Edo has been able to go out there, and you've dug up a lot of stuff there. And so you can kind of see that. I think that this ecosystem has been intentionally suppressed for a very, very long time. Judy and I were buying XRP before the SEC lawsuit came in. And I remember when that happened. And actually, the day before it happened, we put in about $25,000 into buying XRP. Then the thing fell off a cliff, right? Went from about 50-some cents, 60-some cents, down to 17.48. Well, at the time, I just by analyzing what I did for the government there in Canada, interpreting legislation, everything, I thought there is no way they're ever going to be able to designate XRP as a security in and of itself outside of some sort of a contract, because I really looked at it from the point of view with the Howey test and its prongs. It was the orange grows and it was the contracts for the orange grows. And if oranges themselves were going to be the securities, and every grocery store in America would have had to register with the SEC to sell them, I thought that's not going to happen. So our conviction was fairly strong, and the ecosystem has only evolved from there. Big time, really. It has evolved from there. And so when you consider, the influence that, Ripple has right now, with a lot of the decision makers, whether they're elected or not, because of course, WEF, they're most non-elected individuals, but they control a lot. They pull a lot of strings. Real world asset tokenization is coming. There's no way of denying that. XRP Ledger is probably one of the best facilities for doing that. You can practically tokenize anything on the XRP Ledger. So I think this is just an inevitability. I think after post clarity, then some of the price appreciations that Jake has talked about in the past, right over the target. There's no doubt about it. You know, the demand is going to be crazy. I think the implementation and lately now I've been saying it's no longer the adoption. It's really the application, because institutions have adopted it. Zero doubt about that. It's going to be the application, and they're just waiting to get the green light with all of these rules. And my guess is that most of these delegates that are now coming back from Davos are going to their perspective, areas, and they're going to start to implement a lot of this. And so I think that the regulatory clarity piece is definitely coming this year. As Jake said, maybe there's going to be some holdbacks, with respect to the government shutting down at the end of January, whatever. But it's an inevitability. And that, I think, right there should be one of the biggest confidence boosters for anybody that is investing in the space right now. When we see these kind of pullbacks like we did over the weekend, where XRP, I think, dropped to $1.80 and this morning back up to $1.94, 14-cent move, a lot of volatility, that is opportunity in my mind. That's how I interpret that, because post clarity and all that kind of stuff, you're taking a huge piece out of the volatility. And that is, of course, the uncertainty. When the uncertainty gets diminished, the volatility is coming down. Volatility comes down, risk comes down. Risk comes down, reward comes down. Well, people buying on this side of that risk are going to be in a much more advantageous position than those buying it on the opposite side of that risk. At least that's my thoughts.
No, totally agree with you. Some insight?
I think people underestimate how much they can suppress the markets, and they have been doing that with silver. You all remember JP Morgan was fined for manipulating the silver markets. So a lot of people ask me, how come XRP is trading still below $2? And the answer really comes down to people overlooking OTC deals, so over-the-counter deals. Most of the XRP that Ripple allocates, and okay, I don't want to say that I have proof that this happens, but I have been researching for over 5 years in this space, but there is a high chance that they allocated sums of XRP, let's say, to central banks, financial institutions through NDAs, and of course they have done that OTC. So people ask me, if central banks are buying large sums of XRP and they are secured some amounts of XRP, because that's what XRP is meant to do, replace Nostro account. So how come the price of XRP is not going up? People have to understand that in the same way they have manipulated and suppressed the price of silver for years, they're doing the same with XRP. And it's just a matter of whenever they decide to literally flip the switch, which can happen overnight, it can happen at any time. Now, my take is that for XRP to function at a highly scalable price where it has to go up and meets on-demand liquidity, I think there has to be a change in the current financial system, and that's a lot tied to Jake's theory about perhaps the Japan dominoes effect, that he can make some comments on that. But ultimately, XRP's price appreciation, from my view, depends on the failure of the current financial system. And it's already happening in real time. When you see the price of gold hitting new all-time highs above $5,000, that means the dollar meltdown has already initiated. It's just that we were having this conversation in private, me and David, right now. Money has barely any value anymore. I mean, you spend $1,000 like it was $100 10 years ago. At these rates, we can all confirm, I think we all agreed here, that the system is dying. And the melt-up of precious metals, for me, is the death of the US dollar and other fiat currencies.
Wow, that's very powerful. And I want to compliment a lot of the research Jake has been putting out there and many of the people in the ecosystem. But the message is quite simple. At this point, it's so obvious that there's this deliberate framework designed to suppress the XRP price until all the infrastructure is fully built and the legacy systems are ready to migrate. Because if XRP were truly allowed to operate in a open and fair market, it's quite obvious that without these artificial barriers, it wouldn't be trading around $1, very simply put. And to complement what you said on tokenization, when it does come to tokenization, I've always believed that it's going to be the true mechanism that allows XRP to gradually consolidate the world's money. Of course, there are going to be many contributing factors and other technologies. I'd like your comments on that in a bit. But again, it's just what's so compelling about this is that when you start to look at the tokenization of all assets, no matter how advanced, it still requires a settlement layer. And that settlement layer must have certain capabilities like cross-border functionality, interoperability between different multipolar ecosystems. So they're going to need the system that can, this one language you were talking about, Jake, the settlement language that moves all value and settles it and verifies it instantly and reliably. So I totally agree with you on that. Quick question about the carry trade.
Yeah.
The carry trade, you've been talking about that a lot, and it is confirmed that it's breaking down. We see, I think, a headline that came out, guys, today from the central bank, if they're trying to buy yen now. Do you have some insight on that?
Yeah, so we already saw Warren Buffett do this. He moved from U.S. Treasuries to yen, and it looks like the Fed is going to do that as well. It's going to be very advantageous to own Japanese bonds. They're going to continue to escalate in the interest payments that they're going to be, the coupon that they're paying out. And at some point, and we're starting to see this now, a rotation from U.S. Treasuries into those bonds will be the cascade that causes, the reverse carry trade to unwind. I still think that they've held. It looks like the Bank of Japan's held last week, and the Fed looks like they're going to hold again this week because they know that they cannot move interest rates. And you have the narrative that Trump wants, the Fed to move interest rates down. And I'm sure they would actually love to, but they know that it's going to cause everything to unwind, and they're kind of backed into a corner at this point. The catalyst that I've been talking about that will force this is oil. And we're starting to see conflict escalate there in the Middle East. Seems to be Trump that's instigating that conflict, which is interesting, right? Like if he knew that this is what he needed to do to force their hand, he's positioned it very well. And if there is a choke point or a supply route that, the majority of the oil in Japan comes through, if he can suffocate that for even a small period of time, the Bank of Japan will have to raise interest rates. And that gives them a scapegoat, gives the Fed a scapegoat. Everybody can point to that and say that was the issue. And I don't know that Trump wants to be the bad guy on that one. But, that's where I think things sit today. We're sitting right on the precipice of this. And with all of these precious metals skyrocketing, to y'all's point, very clearly, the fiat dollar is dying. All of these fiat currencies continue to inflate at an exponential rate, and they're backed into a corner where they can't lower interest rates, and they have to print more money in order to be able to meet the obligations. Luckily, we got the Genius Act passed last year, and that will allow the banks to soak up a lot of those treasuries as they flow onto the market to be able to stabilize the bond market. Because if we didn't have that, that would be very bad for the global financial system. But it also, to your point, again, is the catalyst for the adoption of these stable coins on the XRPL. There was Zero Hedge released, it was a paper today that Jack McDonald retweeted about stable coins, kind of complementing RLUSD and where they position that and how they are orchestrating those things. And I think that's the template that a lot of other people will use for issuing their stable coins. And now that we have the EVM sidechain that allows the XRPL to be interoperable with all the other players out there, including JP Morgan and Onyx through Axelar, I think everybody's at the table and willing to roll this forward.
Very incredible. No, I appreciate that. Also, to complement what you said of the Japanese carry trade, it does expose the stress that you're talking about. And like you've said many times, when it unwinds, it's going to force repricing across equities, bonds, currencies, and derivatives all at once as well. And it really does validate your thesis that this isn't just a single market issue. And what I find very interesting about the Japanese reverse carry trade, when that really begins to unwind, we have clear indication that The financial institutions in Japan, including their central bank and the bigger banks out there, they're working very closely with Ripple already. So it's almost like they are positioned for this very scenario, and maybe Trump is forcing that hand. Interesting.
Did you see Japan is going to classify XRP as a financial infrastructure or financial tool?
Yeah, that was pretty goosebumps, like I said.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're getting there. Oh, David, would you like to put something in there?
Sure. Just I really think that, you know, I know that it hasn't panned out in the time frames that we all thought it would. I think we all thought we would see this happen, unravel a whole lot faster. There's zero doubt about that. And I think the reason we have such a conviction is because the evidence is all around us of something major that is going to happen, and it's going to happen, you know, fairly rapidly. I want to share my screen and I want to show just something on the BIS website over here. And I'm not really going to get into a whole lot, but I just thought it would be good to kind of show, you know, what they're reporting. Now, this came from this report. It's a next generation of monetary and financial system. And this came out in June of 2025, right? 38-page report that they got here. Well, look at the synopsis that they have down here. You know, Hyun Song Shin explains how tokenization represents a transformative innovation to both improve the old and enable the new financial and monetary systems. Now, the Bank of International Settlements, if folks don't really know, I mean, obviously, it's the central bank of all central banks. And all the central banks around the wide world, including the Federal Reserve, take their marching orders from the BIS. If the BIS says it's going to be so, it's going to happen. And that's just a fact. Well, you know, Jake has been right, you know, from all of this time. Where is a lot of this conviction that he has had coming from? Well, it's been coming from a lot of these major institutions that have tremendous influence on how the financial systems of the world are going to work. And we know very well that Ripple has had partnerships with the BIS, and I can pull up article after article on that. We can see them interacting with the International Monetary Fund as well. You know, they've been a part of the Digital Pound Foundation, the digital dollar, all these various things. You know, when you think of a startup, a company coming out of the blue, having access to these major financial institutions at such a time, and then look at their board, where you had Rosie Rios leave the Treasury and become a board member for Ripple, which at the time, I mean, normally these guys, they leave their jobs, they go on the speaking circuit, get $1 million a speech, or they get, you know, honorary doctor positions at major Ivy League schools. Well, no, she decides to get on board with this newly developed, you know, digital asset, you know, corporation that is looking to, as I think it was, I'm forgetting the guy's name, but the quote was, "We're not just here to make a dent, you know, we're here to actually take over, or we're not here for anything." And you can see it kind of happening and playing out. So I don't think it's a matter of being wrong about what will take place, but just not, you know, the timing is going to be interesting as to how it takes, or I should say, wrong about how it's going to take place, but the when it's going to take place. But I think it will be soon as well. I really do believe that. But there it is, right in black and white. The BIS are talking about the new financial monetary system.
Do you think we need some of these amendments on the XRPL to pass before we can see adoption of the mainnet? I mean, there's permission domains,
Yep.
Which is a big piece. Finally got approval the other day. It's in the 2-week waiting period before it's going to be approved. We already have the multi-purpose token, which I don't know of another chain that has that, but that it allows fungible tokens to have different rights, like stocks. If you were common shares or preferred shares, you might have different voting rights based on what type of multi-purpose token you held. You know, and I'm really excited to see, you know, 64, 65, and 66, you know, potentially proposed this year, which is going to be pseudo accounts, liquidity pools, and borrow lend native on chain. I think that that's really what's going to take the XRPL to the next level. And, you know, we got to have some price appreciation before they can even start using it to settle, though. And I think that's where the supply shock comes in.
I think the 0 point knowledge, that protocol there had to be in, because you cannot have a system where they have a responsibility to protect privacy, but also a requirement to ensure KYC is being, and that is huge. Now, I know, I mean, the biggest criticism back in the day was, oh, Ripple, XRP, it's a banker's coin. It's a banker's coin. Well, now they're trying, the biggest criticism is, oh, banks aren't going to use it. Well, come on. They are literally putting in the protocols required in order to comply with all of what's needed in a financial system, protect our privacy while at the same time, satisfy a lot of what's needed, for KYC. So I just think you're right. I think, some of these protocols need to be put in place. The infrastructure needs to be there. And that's where you'll see all the application. The adoption, I think, is happening as we speak. The application is going to be post clarity. I believe that's how it's going to be.
If I could recap what you guys are saying, also as far as tokenization, like when you start to think about it, the financial markets alone, tokenizing them, you're talking about hundreds of trillions of dollars. And then you want to layer in the tokenized supply chains, commodities, markets, smart contracts, other digital assets. Suddenly you're talking about all the money in the world or all the value. And I think that's the piece that most people still can't comprehend, because if you're talking about every form of value in some way or another, that is going to depend on settlement layer with interoperability. Today, the dollar is the most liquid asset on the planet because it is the instrument for settlement. If XRP becomes that, and it already is, for the digital ecosystem, then yes, it's not really a digital asset. It's leverage, it's liquidity. It's the infrastructure that underpins the value transfer at scale. So I just wanted to reiterate that because it shows how XRP is so undervalued compared to what it should be trading at. And even if it were purely speculative, like our friend Nathan said, we'd be looking at a higher XRP price, obviously. So it is, again, both the most misunderstood and most manipulated instrument besides silver in the digital payments ecosystem, let's say.
Yeah. So you had brought up the BIS there, David. I've said for a long time, we'll see if it ends up being the case. I think it will be that XRP ends up a tier 1 asset designated by the BIS. And to your point, all the other central banks have to fall in line with whatever they say. So U.S. Treasuries has been a tier 1 asset for a long time. They made gold a tier 1 asset in 2019. And I think they will have a peg between oil and gold, and XRP will sit as a tier 1 asset and collateral. And I think that's, to your point, with all the money, the high price is going to become inevitable with available supply. So you're already starting to see XRP being used as collateral on other chains and by other parties. Hidden Road was a big deal for Ripple, which was one of the things you touched on earlier. I don't think people really comprehend what a prime broker does and how all that works. And then, secondary to that, if XRP is wrapped on these other chains and is held as collateral, that removes it from the circulating supply. It's going to be held there. And so it becomes a positive feedback loop, a flywheel, if you will, for the acceleration of the price of XRP as more and more is held as collateral. And if it's a tier 1 asset, derivatives can be, based off of that, and they can put that up as the collateral for derivatives.
It's a very good point. Totally agree with you. Edo, do you have some input?
Yeah, 100% agree. Now with gold-like treatment for XRP being utilized as a collateral, it means less XRP in circulation, further pressure on XRP supply shock. And just to reiterate, this doesn't come out of thin air. I know a lot of you have done research on the XRP supply shock. Back there was an account when I had my Twitter account before being suspended. There was an account called XRP Wallets that I use it to follow. He does phenomenal on-chain analysis, and I was following his work and his research. I give him credits for that. And the last time I have followed the information that he puts out there, and I actually did my own research. So I double-checked the information that he put on chain, and I actually did an experiment. And this is very interesting. Anyone can do that. I went through all the mainstream crypto platforms. So the biggest ones, Binance, Crypto.com. I think back there I go to Coinbase as well. And I run an experiment, and I try to see across all currency pairs. So basically XRP versus dollars, pesos, Swiss francs, Brazilian reais, Japanese yens. I mean, across all possible trading pairs. And I did these experiments to see how much XRP was actually for sale, because a lot of people try to come out and say there is no XRP supply shock because there is this amount of XRP that's held by exchanges. But they fail to understand that because it seems to be in possession of exchanges like Binance, it doesn't mean, number one, that XRP is for sale, because when I did the experiment myself, there was less than 500 million XRP available across all trading pairs, across all mainstream crypto exchanges. So let's say if you arrive there, back there, I don't remember the price, but for the sake of giving an example, if you come with $1 billion and you buy all XRP at once, it would not be enough. I mean, that's how people underestimate these things. And it came to a point where, if you guys have also followed that, it went viral because Brito's wallets, the Arthur Brito, one of the founders of the XRP ledger, together with David Schwartz and Jed McCaleb, his wallet was moved for the first time in 13 years. We tracked down that transactions, and it's insane because this XRP was hitting Binance, and from Binance, it was going towards on-demand liquidity. So the same XRP that was leaving the founders' wallets was being utilized for on-demand liquidity. Now, what that signals? That's simply there is not even enough XRP to cover the current demands of on-demand liquidity. Of course, they secured with the escrow releases enough XRP for the future, but I'm telling you that we are not that far from an XRP supply shock as a lot of people believe, and that can happen quickly. It takes one huge institutional order from a BlackRock, a Grayscale, and that's it. And that's how fast things can change.
And to complement that, actually, it's going to be the tokenization of assets, which is really going to drive the exponential growth in demand for XRP. And we're on the brink of that.
Yeah, it's real. It's going to be the real application of it. I think, there's a lot of right now stuff going out there, and people that have, and I've literally said, oh, they declared themselves experts when, and all this and that. And now they're even more experts, I guess, because they say that, oh, well, there's no real demand and all this and that, and trying to explain things of the XRP ledger and how it would work with banks that we've known about all along since David Schwartz came out and explained it in detail in 2019. The fact is, you got all these ETFs or spot ETFs. Well, they have to hold the underlying asset, don't they? So that creates demand. You got all these SPACs out there, Evernorth, forgive me, being the biggest one, but there's probably 10 or 11 of those that are wanting to. Now, I've just read an article this morning. I mentioned it in my coffee chat of you got institutions that are buying XRP just to hold it in reserve. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that is all creating demand. And like you said, not all XRP is for sale. If you think of what's on an exchange, remember a lot of times, these exchanges pool what they have, or it's almost like a fractional reserve. I mean, if everyone went into Coinbase, tried to withdraw all the XRP that they have, in their accounts at one time, they'd shut the exchange down. There's no way they could actually fulfill it. And, and so what they calculate as being in their custody is not necessarily in their possession, in the sense of, it's kind of IOU'd to the people on there. But as Jake, you've many times pointed this out, that, hey, look, read the fine print. Because if you're keeping your assets in that kind of a custodial platform on an exchange, if they need it, they can take it. That's a fact, Jack. And that is an absolute fact. That is not fear mongering. That is exactly the way it is. So having proper custody solutions, whether that be self-custody or, genuine institutional grade custody. Not all things that have the label institutional are institutional. Certainly Anchorage is, where BlackRock keeps theirs. But this is a big point. And you got all kinds of people saying, well, look, there's this much available out there. And it gives this kind of illusion that I can get it whatever I want it. And it's always going to be cheap. Man, it can turn that fast. And the whole thing can be changed. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I mean, y'all have talked about Tether a few times that I've heard you. And, people have flooded Tether for forever, right? But Tether's got things other than U.S. Treasuries on their balance sheet. And gold is skyrocketing, which is great for them right now. They've been one of the largest acquirers for gold here in the last year, alongside the other central banks. And they've also got Bitcoin on their balance sheet, and they've got some other private debt. But, if, Shane Ellis actually put together a whole theory on this about, Bitfinex going illiquid if there was an issue with Tether. And they would have to use XRP to be able to exchange and provide that liquidity at that point. And it would drive demand on that exchange to a very high price for XRP. So do you think that that'll culminate along with everything else to drive the price up? Exchanges are holding large amounts of XRP, just like you guys pointed out. If you want to go look on chain, you can see it. But again, kind of doubling down on David's point, not all of that's available for retail.
Yeah, the real breakthrough in this technology is, besides the speed and efficiency, it's really the ability to bridge real commodities, so real value, gold, silver, energy resources, with these digital systems that essentially could allow some sort of wealth to circulate back to people instead of just being trapped inside of these paper promises and debt. So I think that's how you actually reset the system without destroying the dignity of people, and how you move into a real golden age where people can retain some of their freedom. But how are they retaining their freedom? It's the true innovation is the fact that you have gold and real value simply moving around the world digitally. I think that's really what they're trying to do. There's this marriage between the two.
I agree. Judy Sheldon, speak about that.
Yeah, I love. Yeah. I love that you mentioned Jake Tether. And have you ever checked on their white paper? Do you know the secret that's hiding there?
Oh, I think you're on mute, Jake.
Yeah, he's on mute.
I said, no, enlighten me.
Oh, okay. So this is our favorite page of Tether white paper. Everyone can find on the official Tether website. On page 10, they come out with implementation weaknesses. And basically, the first one. So I'm going to read this. And by the way, guys, English is not my mother language. So sometimes I do mistakes. When I record videos, sometimes I have to say the things like twice. So we understand that our implementation doesn't immediately create a fully trustless cryptocurrency system, mainly because users must trust Tether Limited and our corresponding legacy banking institution to be the custodian of the reserve assets. However, almost all exchanges and wallets, assuming they hold USD or fiat currencies, are subject to the same weaknesses. And here's a summary of those weaknesses. So the first one, we could go bankrupt, okay? I'm not making this stuff up. This is actually on Tether white paper. Number two is actually our bank could go insolvent. Number three, our bank could freeze or confiscate the funds. Very interesting also. And here's the best one. We could abscond with the reserve funds. So the first time I saw this, I actually had to check the meaning of abscond. As I said, I'm not a native English speaker. And it really means they could disappear in a very suspicious way with everyone's funds. You guys probably know English better than me, so I want to hear your thoughts about that.
That is wild that is right there on their white paper. You have to disclose risk, right? Anytime you're working with a financial institution, I don't know if Tether actually has any banking licenses. But, they've mentioned that they consider themselves a bank here. I don't know that they use fractional reserve lending. We know early on that they would mint Tether and buy Bitcoin and back the Tether that they had just minted with the Bitcoin that they purchased with it, and there's been a very strong correlation of how much Tether's in circulation with the price of Bitcoin over the duration that they've both been around. So be interesting to see, if they were to just abscond with everybody's money and run off. It's not like they didn't tell you, it's right there.
It's right there, exactly. But it's funny because when you really look closely at Tether, and we've talked about this a few times, I think we just kind of put it aside now, because if you look at what they're doing, besides taking profits and converting all that into physical gold, like you said, they have a lot of physical gold now on their balance sheets. What's funny is, if you think about that, they don't even trust the very asset that they claim to be holding as a backing, right? They're accumulating real hard assets, sovereign wealth, while convincing people still that stablecoins, which are essentially dollar-pegged IOUs, are safe. I think that's just a massive red flag, but it, like you said, they're telling you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they have Tether Gold, right?
Yeah.
Like
Now they do.
Stablecoin, and then they also have USAT, which they're going to be rolling out with Bo Hines over as the head of that. And for me, both of those things are tells, right? Like this is the evolution of that company, and they know that they need to get in a position where they're solvent and can continue to persist on the other side of this. But I do think that there is going to be a point where, when the reverse carry trade unwinds, Tether depegs and loses, a lot of confidence along with everything else.
Essentially, that is then the compliance taking over in the digital ecosystem. And we're talking now about RLUSD getting more value on chain to the XRP ledger. Can I ask you something? Maybe you could clarify this for the audience. I've done it 100 times, but they keep coming back with the same questions.
Okay.
XRP and RLUSD, people think one is taking over the other. They don't realize they actually are interwoven.
Yeah, they complement one another. So liquidity begets liquidity, right? So the more value you can move onto the XRP ledger and then settle through XRP, right? RLUSD settling with whatever other tokenized derivatives are out there. In exchange, VanEck has now launched their product that's interoperable with RLUSD, and you've got more and more of these financial institutions, giving Ripple money to be able to mint RLUSD for them to be able to list it and trade it and do things with it. Over time, that liquidity will move through XRP and vice versa. And that's the whole point. And it also, again, kind of sets up a standard for people issuing stablecoins on the XRPL, how that's going to look, what it's going to do, and the liquidity that provides, so that it illustrates that for other institutions that want to do the same thing. They're the market leader for it. I don't know that they'll be the largest stablecoin over the long term, but I think they're definitely always going to be a player. And as long as, again, this is kind of the same thing with Tether, you have to trust the counterparty, right? But if they have audited, transparent financials that they're able to share with people, then that provides a lot more confidence. Tether doesn't have that.
Yeah.
Well, I think they had like a top 14 audit firm come in and work with them at some point. And they have like percentages on their website or somewhere where they've disclosed, what they're holding. And that's how people know that, there's a portion of it that's gold and other things that are not treasuries themselves. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see, how all of this plays out. But I do think the XRPL is going to be the main blockchain that CBDCs and stablecoins are going to be issued on.
I totally agree with you. And as more of its use cases continue to expand, it's going to have to climb to a higher and higher price to satisfy that demand. Quick other question as well. Where was I going with this? Do you think XRP will decouple from the traditional markets? Because I've always believed for it to fulfill its true intended purpose, it has to decouple from traditional markets by design, because it's supposed to operate as its own settlement system. And in my opinion, it really is going in that direction. I don't know if the Clarity Act will help, but certainly it will kill a lot of the speculation out there. And, what do you think about that?
We've seen it decouple once. And that was when people found the trust that had been filed in Delaware for BlackRock's iShares XRP ETF, which they, swept under the rug and said that it was fake, and Bloomberg came out and reported on it. But you never had a comment from Ripple or from BlackRock directly on that. And it decoupled from the rest of the market immediately when that announcement, kind of hit Twitter. But I think that that's going to be, the point in time when that happens again is when BlackRock steps in, and there will be likely a supply shock that allows XRP to decouple from the rest of the crypto market and Bitcoin. I often watch the XRP Bitcoin chart just to see, the long descending triangle where it's at. And there has been times in its past where XRP has appreciated substantially against Bitcoin in a very short period of time. I think that we will likely see that again. We've already started to see it a little bit. We've seen, volume on the Bitcoin ETFs slow down, or actually outflows from the Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs. And we've seen the majority of those flows move into the XRP ETFs, which is very different than previous cycles. Normally that rotation would happen on exchanges, But now that the institutions have, put out these derivatives and they are adopting this asset class and providing it to their investors, I think that that's where the rotation of liquidity is going to happen this cycle. And I do think that that's what's going to cause XRP to decouple from the rest of the financial markets.
Yeah, it has to. It's very possible it could be a geopolitical pressure, like the carry trade, for instance. And it doesn't just happen in Japan. It could be happening all over the world simultaneously, because we're not just playing with the Japanese market. We're playing with every market. If you read the book Economic Hitman, they've infiltrated every financial institution around the planet, and they're obviously coordinating for some major event where and that's where you get that flip the switch moment, I guess. Something breaks, and we're already seeing the signals everywhere, but then bang, all the infrastructure's there, the institutions are ready, the regulations are there, and bang, you start using XRP, climbs to a higher price, and that's your supply shock. Something like that could happen easily.
I completely agree. Yeah. I do have to jump here. Did y'all have anything y'all wanted to run through before I have to hop?
Tell us a little bit about what you're doing at DWP, you guys, or your institutional custody. Let's talk about that a little bit, because I do get this question quite often, and I have told a few people to reach out to you, and maybe you could just give us how do people protect their digital assets in this ecosystem?
Yeah, so, a lot of people use self-custody, which I think is great, but that comes with a lot of responsibility, right? And we work with some family offices that operate that way. Nothing wrong with that. But they have multiple people that understand the asset class. They know how to use the keys, recreate the wallet if something happens. They're familiar with how to send things to and from exchanges. They have a trustee that, they're involved with that, but it's cumbersome. And in order to make sure that you have true multi-sig or verification and somebody's not going to hoodwink you and run off with your stuff, it's hard to trust other people. So we work with Anchorage. They are an institutional custodian. They have the licenses to be able to operate in that capacity. Their oversight, here in the US is the OCC. They were the first federal bank charter that was issued to be able to hold digital assets. Got 5 more now that are in their preliminary phase. Ripple's one of those, which is exciting. But they're bankruptcy remote, which is a big deal. They're not relief of stay like BNY Mellon. So if there was a bankruptcy, you still have to go through the bankruptcy process, but your assets are never theirs. You are never a creditor to them. Like, Dave was talking about the exchanges. That's their assets. It's kind of like the bank. When you put your money in the bank, that is their money. You are a creditor of that institution. Our accounts don't work that way. Their FBO accounts are for the benefit of. So, Digital Wealth Partners, like you mentioned, is the RIA. It's an SEC registered RIA. We'll likely go through our audit with the SEC in the near term. We just got done with our audit for the fund, the hedge fund that we have over there, to be able to put XRP to work to generate returns for people. But we're able to hold that there, segregated, bankruptcy remote, insured up to $100 million on the account. And, you're able to add your spouse on there. You're able to add your trustee. You can put beneficiaries on the account. What I say is it's a Schwab account for your crypto, right? And some people, we have clients that hold a portion in their cold wallet, and they hold a portion with us, or they hold a portion somewhere else. No issue with that, right? Everybody, you probably want some diversification in the way that you're holding your digital assets so that you don't have one central point of failure. We're even looking at adding additional custodians to be able to diversify clients' holdings across multiple institutional providers.
Right.
And then we get to do some cool stuff there. We have tri-party agreements where we can, work with other people that will issue liquidity against XRP. People are able to access lines of credit against it. And then we have the hedge fund where we're able to hold the XRP in institutional custody, reflect that off exchange. So you're mitigating, the risk of the counterparty. They get a line of margin against that reflected value of about 80%. If we on board with Zodia, like we think we're going to, then we'll actually get 100% line of margin against it. But we only ever trade like 40 or 50% of that line of margin, because we don't ever want there to be an issue where they call the capital. We saw on 1010, like if you wanted a stress test, we got the stress test on 1010 for everything that we've been doing. We had no XRP called away on loans or for the hedge fund when that event happened. Some of the accounts actually made money on the strategies when that volatility took place in the market. So really excited about the products that we're going to be able to bring to market this year. People seem to be excited about it. And again, none of this is possible if people didn't want to protect their digital assets and make sure that their families are going to be able to secure it for multiple generations, and wanted to work with us on that solution.
Yeah, I really appreciate you actually breaking it down, giving us more detail on it, because you're giving people options, and that's what's important. And I like that. Personally, you're right. It is cumbersome. I do have 8 hardware wallets. It is a bit excessive, and
I had 12.
Constantly. Exactly. See, yeah, it is a lot of material. It's just, in this time and age with digitization, digital IDs. I mean, we can recap the WEF Davos. I mean, I listen to every second of that. And they're really pushing this digital ID infrastructure. And, some people feel like maybe they can beat the system at their own game again. And I don't know if you really can, but.
Well, I'll tell you this. So we talked with MasterCard in Dubai in 2024, and they told us that they can trace Bitcoin back to the first time it was mined. Anybody that's ever transacted with digital assets, they know you hold it. They know where you bought it. They know where you've moved it. I had a friend that just tried to onboard with Uphold a few weeks ago. And in his past, at his Coinbase account that he's had open for more than a decade, they saw that he had some Bitcoin interactions with a wallet that had been sanctioned at some point.
Oh my
and they
God.
were like, "Hey man, were you aware of this?" And he's like, that was a long time ago. I have no idea, what happened with all that. So just so people are aware, like that was 2012.
Wow.
So, they can trace it back. And if people, these are public blockchains. And if you wanted to create a honeypot to be able to track all of the criminals globally and tell them that you could transact anonymously somewhere so that they could circumvent sanctions and other things, seems like a really good way to do it. And I think, some of that might come out in the Epstein files. We haven't seen the full release of that stuff yet.
It's a snare.
Yeah.
People are getting locked in. Oh my God.
So we'll see. But yeah, if you've bought digital assets, if you've taken profits, if you've done all those things, just work with the tax professional to mitigate the taxes and figure out what you owe. And if you do really want to hold it somewhere off away from everything, I don't know that you're going to be able to do that. But with the zero knowledge proofs and digital identity on the XRPL, and the other reason that I'm such a big proponent of XRP versus other things is it can't be frozen, can't be clawed back, it can't be taken from you, right? These other digital assets, there are some other things where they can do that. Issued assets on the XRPL, they can do that, but banks want to. Like, if you're going to issue a financial instrument and somebody hacks that wallet and takes the stocks, you need to be able to call that back. In talking with the regulators, this is a while back, this was last year, some of them were still thinking you had to roll back the blockchain in order to be able to move things around or redo things. And a lot of them just aren't aware of all the capabilities that smart contracts bring to tokenized assets. So I'm excited to see that the education's come forth and the Clarity Act's on the horizon here. And I do think that 2026 is going to be a really big year for people.
Agreed. Guys, you want to put any input in or final words to Jake?
Well, I'm happy you're on here, man.
I know.
It's so funny. One guy wrote on one of my things. He said, "Oh, I hear you haven't mentioned your good friend Jake Claver." And I responded back, said, number one, he is my friend. Number two, that's not true. And number three, we're hoping to get him back on our channel soon. So, Judy will probably reach out to you one of these days, say, "Hey, we got to get back on." No, you've really brought, I think, a lot of light to, this ecosystem, how people can really, understand it a whole lot better. We're all making our projections, but we're making it based on the information that we can literally see in black and white. And, that's where a lot of our convictions are coming from. And you've really stuck to that the whole time, haven't deviated. Even when it looked like, oh, well, things weren't panning out in the time frame that you thought. I really appreciate the fact that you stuck to that conviction, because that is a conviction that all of us on this panel right now share and have shared for a very, very long time. And there's just tremendous amounts of evidence out there. But but I really appreciate you just being able to come out and talk to this group and our, our audience and community. And I thank you very much for doing it.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be back anytime you guys want to have me.
Yeah, Edo.
Yeah, just to quickly reiterate what he said, that's what I love about XRP itself. Nobody can claw back your XRP, and we have proposed this concept here on the turning points. We can actually literally run a parallel economy on XRP. We can all transact with each other, pay for goods and services, and nobody can ever prevent you from sending XRP from A to B. Now, I know the clawback feature sounds scary because you can reverse transactions of issued assets on the XRP ledger for compliance reasons, of course. If they want to reverse transactions with stablecoins, of course, banks and financial institutions, they need to do it. And of course, if you want to enable tokenization of real-world assets on the XRP ledger, let's say if you tokenize a building, or let's say you tokenize a house into 100 different tokens, and if something happens in the real world, if there's a fire and the property gets destroyed, you have to find a way to mimic these events on real life, but on the blockchain, and you do it through the clawback feature that's going to actually reverse and confiscate the tokens that have been issued to create a digital representation of such property on the blockchain. So just to conclude, and finally, I want to send a special thanks to everyone. Thanks for Jake to coming to the show. Hopefully, we're going to have him again. I think we all enjoyed this conversation. It has been a pleasure. Versan, any final thoughts? And by the way, guys, drop your location in the comments so you help to boost the algo, and we're going to hit more views.
Yeah, Jake, it really has been a fascinating conversation, and I'm just glad we got to actually sit down and talk with you about some of the things we've all been sharing in this ecosystem. Just getting some real depth from you is very important and insightful. So, we really do think alike in so many ways. And again, I've always had that connection. I felt that. So I hope to have you back on in the future, and hopefully my brother could join us as well.
Yeah, it'd be good. Vandell, he's not too far from me in Texas. So
yeah, y'all should spend some more time together.
We should. Well, thank you guys again for having me. Would love to come back. And like you said, I think this has been a fantastic conversation. Hopefully provided you guys a lot of value that are watching out there. Like, subscribe, drive that algorithm like Ito said, and we'll see you guys on the next one.
Sounds good. Take care.